So that's it, we've reached the end game of Thrones. In the span of 1 month, we've seen 2 massive decade-plus long cultural phenomenons come to an end, the likes of which the world has never seen before. Now, in my Avengers Endgame review, I gave the movie a 9 out of 10 on a standalone basis, but for the way it wrapped up the whole series and gave satisfying conclusions to so many character arcs, I had to give it a 10 out of 10. Now, did Game of Thrones accomplish the same thing with its final season?
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter.
Be warned, this review is dark and full of spoilers. Now, Game of Thrones kinda reminds me of the Harry Potter movies in the sense that we see the characters, especially the children, grow figuratively and literally over the course of the series. But one way in which they differ is that all of the Harry Potter movies were based on excellent source material, and I can't exactly say the same thing for all the seasons of Game of Thrones. Now, thanks to my friend Kenneth, I had actually read the first book in the series, A Game of Thrones, before the show even came out. The series is actually called A Song of Ice and Fire, and that was a nice little nod to that in the finale. But because the first book was so accurate to the first season, including much of the dialogue even being word for word, I actually spoiled a lot of the show for myself, so I stopped reading the books after that point, and I just started watching the show. Now, Game of Thrones had so much well-developed lore. It had amazing characters, it had political intrigue, it had subterfuge, it had so many jaw-dropping and unpredictable moments. Who can forget the Red Wedding, or the Purple Wedding, or the Battle of the Bastards? There were just moments that will be talked about for years to come and will always be remembered when it comes to the pinnacle of television. But just like Dexter, which also ran for 8 seasons and peaked after like season 4, it started going downhill, and I found this funny little meme that kind of describes that. Now, the show gave us some villains that we really love to hate, especially Joffrey and Ramsay. But the great thing about the show is that all of the characters kind of operated in shades of grey, and they weren't really truly black or white. And that's one great thing about the show. It's very nuanced and realistic, and it kept you guessing about what the characters' motivations were and what they were going to do. Now, my favorite character in the series would probably be Tyrion. I found him to be the most relatable for me, but I didn't like how they kind of dumbed him down towards the end of the series. But apart from him, there were just so many other great characters to choose from. But to name a few off the top of my head, I would have to say Peter Baelish, aka Littlefinger, and he was actually responsible for a lot of what happened in the series. And then there was Lyanna Mormont, there was Olenna Tyrell, there was Varys, there was Sir Brienne of Tarth, there was Sandor Clegane, aka the Hound. Just so many amazing characters. Now, there were some characters with substantial character arcs, but unfortunately not all of them were for the better. Now, let's start with Theon. He started off as selfish and arrogant and power hungry and a bit of a prick, but after he lost his, he became more noble and self-sacrificing, and he gave his life to save Bran. And that was a good arc for him, I like that. And then we have Sansa, who started off as a weak, naive little girl, but was forged through the crucible of terrible marriages into a hardened, powerful, strong woman who became the Queen of the North. And then we have Sandor Clegane, who I've already mentioned, but he had a really good arc. He started off as an almost heartless monster, but over time, through bonding with Arya and even a little bit with Brienne, he started to grow a heart, get more empathy, and I like the way he went out by taking out his older brother, the Mountain. It was really symbolic how they landed in the flames, because it was a callback to how the Mountain burned the Hound's face in the fire. And now we're getting to the more disappointing character arcs. Let's start with Jaime Lannister. Now, Jaime was one of my favorite characters for most of the show with the whole development that he'd been getting. He was what I was hoping to be the Prince Zuko of the series, you know, going from bad to good. But unfortunately, towards the end, he just has that little 180 moment, and I'm not trying to say he goes evil again or anything like that, but the whole romantic relationship that he'd been building with Brienne over the last few seasons just evaporated in the blink of an eye. And it just felt like he
missed it by that much.
I mean, he just hit it and quit it with Brienne, gave her a one-night stand, and then went back to Cersei, who he had kind of established was a psycho evil murderer with Tyrion, and he still just undid all of that. Oh, and is it just me, or does Jaime look almost exactly like Prince Charming in Shrek 2? And finally, let's get to Daenerys. Now, obviously there was some foreshadowing about how the Targaryen bloodline can be susceptible to madness and all of that, but it was really against her whole character progression through the whole series. She was always very noble and kind and compassionate and wanting to do what was right, and always was distraught when innocents were hurt or killed. So it was really abrupt. It was very contrived and not organic at all, and I think I can say that for pretty much all of season 8 as a whole, but I'll get to that later. But I think what they should have done is gone more along the lines of Azula in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, Azula was always evil to begin with, but they did a really good job of portraying her descent into madness after she was betrayed by her friends. So they really didn't do the best job they could have with that. Now, Jeremy Jahns mentioned that Dany's turn to the dark side was really reminiscent of Anakin's in Revenge of the Sith, and looking back at it, I'd have to agree. Now let's get back to season 8 and the finale. Now, as I said before, it felt really contrived, but it was also so extremely rushed. A lot of the major moments that had been building up for years just had no clout behind them because they were just whizzed through in the blink of an eye. Now let's start with the White Walkers. They were teased from the very first episode as being this incredible destructive force that was going to dominate the land of the living and just lay waste to everything. And then Arya just takes out the Night King with one stab, and then all of a sudden it's over, and there was very little aftermath after that as well. So that was quite unsatisfying for me. And here are a few inconsistencies I noticed. For example, in the Battle of Winterfell, it looked like the Dothraki army was pretty much obliterated by the White Walkers, and yet there were still hundreds of them left a few episodes later. On top of that, Euron took out Rhaegal with 3 almost consecutive shots from the Scorpion on a moving flying dragon. And then later, Daenerys just takes out a whole fleet with hundreds of Scorpions, and all of a sudden, they had the aim of stormtroopers. Cersei was also taken out way too fast by a rock. I mean, come on, there was like no other characters involved, and it just felt like a really cheap way out without her having to pay any penance for what she had done. And just after Daenerys becomes the Mad Queen, she gets taken out almost instantly by Jon Snow with just the stab to the heart. And there was very little impact from that for me. It just kind of had no emotional resonance, apart from when Drogon did the whole Simba and Mufasa thing. That got to me a little bit. But apart from that, it just felt like it didn't have enough weight to it, which was really disappointing. I don't know why, maybe it's just me. Maybe let me know in the comments below how you felt about that. Now let's get to who finally became the king of the 7 kingdoms, or 6 kingdoms I should say. They really did my boy Jon dirty for that, I reckon. He'd been foreshadowed to be the king, had been alluded to from the very beginning. He was a Targaryen, the true heir to the throne. The series is called A Song of Ice and Fire, and he's half Targaryen, which is fire, and half Stark, which is from the north, which is ice. So it felt like he was destined to be on the throne, and then they gave him like such a severe punishment, not allowed to get married or have children. I think that's pretty harsh, and he pretty much saved the whole world. But it was good to see Jon reunited with Ghost after so callously leaving him without petting him earlier in the season, so that was alright. And then Bran becomes king. I mean, sure, it's convenient that he has his own chair and doesn't need the Iron Throne, which Drogon has now melted into a puddle, but it just felt so unearned and out of nowhere. I don't know, what do you guys think? Now I know it sounds like I'm ragging on this show a lot, and I am, but it's only because I'm so disappointed knowing how much potential this had and how far it fell short from that. I'm not the only one disappointed either. Over 500,000 people have signed an ill-fated petition to get HBO to remake season 8, but we know that's never going to happen, unfortunately. A poll on my Instagram also showed about 80% of my friends were disappointed with the finale as well. Now I know it would be unfair of me to rate the entire series based on just this last season, because as the German poet Rilke said, a person isn't who they are during the last conversation you had with them. They're who they've been throughout your whole relationship. And so if I average it all out, I'm going to have to give Game of Thrones 4 out of 5 pies. Now all of the things that Game of Thrones got wrong in its last season just reminded me of all of the things that Avatar: The Last Airbender got right. Now this is one of few shows that I'd give 5 out of 5 to. Now if you're one of those people that says that animated shows are just for kids, then you need to shut your mouth and open your mind, because they have a lot more in common than you realize. For one thing, they both have excellent source material that was butchered by people taking way too much creative license. Now I'll probably be doing a full series review of this as well, so make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss that. Now as Boromir / Ned Stark would say, one does not simply skip the Game of Thrones intro. And as a tribute to how much I love this show, and especially this theme song, I'm going to be playing it for you now on my guitar. Not very well, I might add, but I'm not a musical genius by any stretch of the imagination, so just bear with me if you can. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope you liked it. If you did, please hit like and subscribe so you can see more content. Also feel free to check out any of the other stuff I made so far. Until next time, Vela Morgales.
Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage.